Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. We have a really special guest this hour. We have Steve Osunsami. He is a reporter for ABC. He put together the most powerful documentary I have ever seen, or I would even hands down say it is the most powerful media I have ever seen on the topic of diabetes and its complication, peripheral artery disease, which is that poor circulation in the legs, those sugar molecules. If you have extras running around, they can get into trouble. They can, cause damage to your arteries. And that leads to that healing response, plaque buildup in your arteries. Your blood flow gets restricted because of the narrowing in your arteries. And that could increase your risk for amputation. Thank goodness there are a lot of doctors these days that more and more that can open up the narrowed areas of your arteries. But we're still having trouble because we have this diabetes epidemic, and we have so many patients out there that are just presenting at advanced stages, where those arteries are pretty tough to open up by the time that they present to doctors. But John, before I think we get started, I want to say hello to Steve. And
Hello.
Steve is going to play just a couple minutes of this documentary to get us started.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This documentary is airing on ABC News Live. It's airing on Hulu. It's got an incredible response. But you know what? Let me go ahead and start it, and we'll just give a couple minutes of it so you can hear the top of it. And I'll stop it at the point where I kind of come in, and I can take it from there.
Perfect.
40% of individuals don't have any symptoms in their legs.
At all.
No symptoms at all.
I remember getting up, opening the door, and after that, I don't remember anything else that happened.
The first thing that I felt were cramps in my calves.
It's easier to just tell someone we're going to be performing an amputation and move on.
Doctor just pretty much said, okay, we either keep it and die or we amputate it.
I did have a doctor who came in and told me, you need to pray.
In the 8 minutes I've been up here, 2 people have had their legs chopped off. Do I have your attention yet?
Patients, especially the Black and brown community, are resistant to injections.
If you had not had to lose a piece of you, would you be as vigilant as you are now?
The amputation was a wake-up call.
And this is where I tell a personal story. And the story is about my father. My father was a diabetic who was a very stubborn man, and was taking medication for his diabetes. And he ended up losing kidney function, and he lost his sight, and was about to lose his legs. And I remember looking at his feet, and he looked like his feet looked like he was on The Walking Dead. They just looked dead. I mean, they looked dead. And I just, I remember I was just really emotional. And so he also now, of course, because his feet, he has circulation, he's about to lose them, he can't really walk. In the last few years of his life, he needed a wheelchair. He ended up because he didn't, his feet were, he was about to lose his legs. He fell down a flight of stairs, hit his head, and died in the home before he could have his legs amputated, because that's where he was really close to having his legs amputated. My father was an inspiration for this report, as were the relatives of about a dozen people who worked on this half-hour special, this mini documentary special, who all had someone in their lives who either suffered from diabetes or had complications as a result of diabetes, or needed an amputation as a result of those complications. We had more than a dozen people working on this piece, And, for those who, people who watch it, you'll see tributes to those people at the end of it, at the end of the half hour, because we dedicate this piece to those loved ones. Kim, it is, I really appreciate that you recognize the power of the storytelling that we do here. It was very important to me that this not be just a rote medical story. And
Yes.
I tried very hard to make sure that you understood the emotion of the people we're introducing you to, the challenges that they face in terms of managing their diabetes, some at their own fault, some of their own things that they failed at, but also that you understand the systemic reasons for this rise in amputations that we were seeing in certain parts of this country.
I'm coming up right here on the Heart of Innovation. We'll have more of Steve's story. Stay with us. You don't want to miss it. Welcome back to the show. We are talking to Steve Osunsami. He is the reporter for Severed, ABC News Live's program based on the experiences of patients suffering from diabetes and its major complication known as peripheral artery disease, which is poor circulation mainly in the legs. It is a disease more prevalent and deadlier than all cancers combined, except for lung cancer. And yet, it is one of the most debilitating diseases most have never heard of, yet impacts 1 in 3 diabetics over age 50, 1 in 5 adults over age 60. And too many doctors are brushing off textbook symptoms of leg pain, leg cramps, neuropathy, and numbness as old age, diabetic neuropathy, fibromyalgia, and even sciatica. Diagnosed and treated soonest, there's so much that we can do in a conservative way. But because it's not happening, too many patients, especially in communities of color, are ending up with amputation. We've got to stop it. And I think that this documentary has the power to spread awareness and have the impact and create the change that we're all looking to see. We have with us Juanita, who also has PAD, who has undergone an amputation, and she is our guest patient co-host for this episode. I want to introduce her in because she wants to share some insight, her perspective, and ask a question of Steve. Go ahead, Juanita.
Steve, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us with this conversation, and thank you for doing the reporting, the great reporting that you do. I heard you mention about your dad and his feet looking like, the Grateful Dead, death.
The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead. Yes, yes.
Right. And in my case, it started out looking like a mosquito bite at the top of my foot. A tiny mosquito bite that turned into, and mind you, I was going to the doctor trying to figure out what that was because it got worse as time went on, as you can imagine. But I couldn't understand, why would they allow my toes to turn totally black and then want to amputate instead of helping me and giving me the knowledge to where we could do something better. And not only did that happen, and I got all 5 of my toes amputated, and then I got my foot amputated back twice again. I do have PAD, peripheral artery disease. I had a physician to put stents in I had a bypass, and I had stents put in above my navel. And because I'm a tiny person, I'm 5'3". I was 120 pounds. And because he put these stents in me and he placed them in wrong, whenever I bend over, if I move a certain way, I can feel these stents.
Yeah, it's so awful.
Yes. And it's horrible. The things that I went through, the things that I should not have had to experience, because I was putting all my trust in my physicians, thinking that they were going to be, there to help me, to save my toes, to save my piggies. And now I'm having PTSD by going to doctors here in Maryland because this is where all of my trauma began. I had to move to Michigan in order to get my life saved. So this is a difficult conversation. And what I don't understand is, why is it that we have so many, and God knows cancer is a horrific thing in itself, but why is it that we have so many reports out on cancer, but yet when we talk about peripheral artery disease, it's like we're talking a foreign language.
Right.
People don't know about peripheral artery disease, and they think it's sugar. And us as African Americans, you know, I'm from the South, and everything is put sugar in, and everything is spicy, and everything is, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I
I would,
don't. Go
I would,
ahead.
I would, there's a lot you've shared there. I would share a couple things. There's one though that's very important, and that is the comparison between other diseases.
Mhm,
I think part of the difficulty with diabetes is it's a silent, slow, it's a sneak attack.
mhm,
And then heart disease has the drama of a heart attack, right?
mhm.
We
Yes,
we even say it in our culture, as serious as a heart attack, right?
yes,
We all
yes.
know if your heart stops, you die there. You
Mhm,
can die right there. And
mhm,
with diabetes, there's no version of the heart attack, right?
mhm,
People they don't get it. There's not this mental connection to what the harm is. It's not as,
mhm,
and it moves. The other thing with diabetes is, the suffering or the poor management of the disease and not treating it now, the damage comes later,
mhm.
Right.
much later. It's like a train that's kind of coming, and I think that that's some of what the difference is. It just doesn't have the press, frankly,
Well,
that
but, I guess what I would say too is that it doesn't have a face. And so,
mm,
Steve, you have a platform
Yes.
to speak, and you can send your message to millions of people. We send our message probably to thousands of people.
Mhm,
But I've said this for a long time. If you, Juanita, if you felt a lump in your breast, that would set off so many bells and whistles in your head that you would, okay, I mean, for example, a mammogram that gets done, if there's something wrong with it, it gets, you get the next step, next step, next step, next step. You
mhm,
noticed something wrong with your toe, and
mhm,
you probably didn't know what it was, and
mhm,
maybe your physician didn't know what it was, but that doesn't set off alarm bells. And the alarm bells go off when you're missing toes, and then they go off even louder when you're missing your leg. And that's where we fall short. We don't have, and this comes off wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway.
mm,
Cancer, well, PAD is not sexy. Okay.
yeah.
Not that cancer is sexy, but it just, I don't know. And you guys in media know better than me, but there's just something about it that people can get their arms around and rally behind. And
I,
that's what we need to do for PAD.
I know
I'm
what you're
curious.
saying. I've had prostate cancer. So yeah, I've had prostate cancer and I'm pre-diabetic and and it's much easier to explain cancer around the board, even across cancers, people get it that essentially you've got something that's taking over the body and it kills you. It's harder with diabetes to explain it and explain what the problem is. And because diabetes, the complications come essentially from blood vessels that are weakened. And in the brain, it's a stroke. In the heart, it's a heart attack. And in the limbs, it's PAD. It's harder to get people to wrap their heads around what's really happening and how bad it is. And you're right, that we do in this documentary put a face to it. And as we were putting it together, I remember one of our editors, because it's a very collaborative process how we produce these things. And so
mhm,
I write the script. I'm the writer and I select the sound and all of that. But sometimes someone in the edit room will say, you know, we're missing this. And one of the things that one of the editors came back to us in the process was he wanted us to really underline to people in this how it changes not just your life, but the life of the people who care about you when you lose a limb or when you lose toes. And that was one of the things that we did to sort of help drive home the seriousness of diabetes and PAD.
Coming up right here on the Heart of Innovation, I am really curious about, you know, with so many media not latching onto this as they do with cancer. I'm curious what his fight was like to get this process to build this documentary underway. So stay with us. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This show is all about a powerful documentary put together by Steve Osunsami and his team with ABC on peripheral artery disease and diabetes. And we have a question coming in from someone in our audience. Frank, what is your question for Steve?
Sure. Thanks, Kim. Hello, Steve, and
Hello.
thank you for coming out to Chicago to include Mr. Starks as one of your interviewees.
Yes.
He did a great job as a pad warrior on your show. I hope the documentary stays on the ABC News Archive and on Hulu so that a lot of people get to see it for a long time. I'll be sharing the link for a while.
It will stay on Hulu for at least a year, and it will always be available on abcnews.com. And it'll be on Hulu for a year. It's now airing in repeat on ABC News Live, our streaming channel, which you can get on a whole bunch of different places, like I just was looking. And here's the thing. It's actually doing fairly well for a medical story, and that's really good news. Yeah.
That's great. Yes.
It was really well done. And did you have a question, Frank, for him? Go ahead.
Yes. Here in Chicago, I have a lot of choices between hospitals and medical clinics. And yet, when my turn came, I didn't take advantage of that. And so I ended up in the hands of a non-limb saver who went the conventional way, angioplasty, stents, bypass, and then, you know, don't worry, you'll be fine. We'll get you a great prosthetic. So now I own a prosthetic on my right leg. And the show really brought to light a lot of these difficulties about asking questions or seeking a second opinion. Steve, are you also getting that feedback after the program aired?
Yes, we're hearing from a lot of people who share that. And, you know, and it's, as we shared in the documentary, it can be a tough call. It can really be a tough call. And, you know, JB, who you talk about, you know, he even said it. He's like, you know, some of these doctors, they don't know whether or not you're going to make the lifestyle changes that are needed to support whatever sort of saving of your limbs that they're able to do. They don't know that, you know, let's look at my father as a perfect example. You know, I know that he had a vascular surgeon who attempted to save his legs. I don't know that he would have done the work necessary to make that surgery successful or those treatments successful so that he wouldn't end up losing that leg anyway. And so it can be a tough, you know, and John, I'm curious what he has to say about this. It can be a tough call for physicians. But at the same time, you know, one of the big problems we have is this sort of unconscious bias that it's just easier to cut. It's easier to, you know, it's easier to cut, and it's harder to explore the options. It's harder to get a patient to make some of the changes they need. It's harder to put a stent in. It's harder to go in and remove plaque from, you know, from blood vessels. Those are harder to do in many instances. And so I do encourage people, you know, it's also, here's another thing that's difficult. It's tough when you're in the middle of the crisis, right?
Yes.
To then, yeah, Kim, right? It's tough when you're in the middle of the crisis to then say, oh, shoot, I need a second opinion when you've got gangrene set in, right?
Right. And you're in unconscionable pain.
Right. That's a hard
I've
time.
had patients, right. We have, one of our advocates for our organization, legendary Harlem Globetrotter, Larry Shorty Coleman, who had his leg amputated. And he said, I was in so much pain. I just said, doctor, I don't care, just cut it off, because he couldn't fathom that anything they could do, medication, intervention, surgery, nothing. He didn't think that anything could have rectified or brought him any sort of relief. It wasn't until he ended up on deck for his second leg that he ended up finding the Global PAD Association, and we were able to get him a second opinion and fast. But you're right. You're in the thick of it. The doctor's in front of you saying, it's either your limb or your life.
Yeah.
You got to do this now.
Yeah. It's really hard under those circumstances to then say, okay, I'm going to get a second opinion. Okay, I'm going to go see if I can find a vascular surgeon who can help. Okay, at that point, you would hope that by that point they know what the circulation levels are in your legs. I will say this, and we haven't talked about this yet. It's one of the things that we talk about in our special. There is a simple test. Simple test,
Very.
right? Super simple test that, right, that people who might be at risk can take that will give you a good heads up. And it's called the ABI.
And even simpler, 2 fingers, 2 seconds can save life and limb. Just feel my feet, touch my leg pulses.
Yeah.
Those pulses with your fingers, even alone, will tell you so much.
Yeah.
Steve, let me comment on the question from Frank, and then your response about it's easier, or not easier, but sometimes physicians will say, well, I don't think the patient's going to get the ball across the goal line, even if I do something. I struggle with that, but I've come to terms that I don't feel like I have, and this is just my opinion, but I don't feel like I have the right to make that decision for a patient.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got somebody who has a gunshot wound who robbed a store, you're going to save their life most likely. Let other people pass judgment on them. And I say this to family members all the time, because family members will say, you know what, I don't think Dad or Mom or Uncle Jimmy has it in him to do what needs to be done. My thought is let's make him or her decide that. That's a decision that they have to make. I'm going to do what I can. And I say, as long as you're going to fight for your limb and let me help you save the piggies, I will do it for you. Now, to the point of it's easier to cut, I'm not a surgeon, right? So I don't think that way. And I don't know that maybe surgeons think that way, but I feel like there are opportunities. Every patient has an opportunity for a second opinion. There are a few cases where someone is so sick with a dead leg that it has to come off right away. But there's a lot of times you can get somebody transferred, and you can get them to the right physicians if you have enough wherewithal. And that's what your documentary, I think, is doing.
Here's one question for you, John. What if you have someone who comes into an emergency room, has no insurance, and they are presenting this way, and it's a judgment call? How much harder is it to take the extra effort to explore the options about what vascular you can do for these people to save a limb or toes or anything like that?
So this is my experience. I work for a large health system in Central Ohio. I'm in Columbus. I've never had to deal with whether or not somebody has insurance when they may walk through the emergency room. We do deal with insurance issues and patients not having the right insurance, trying to come in to see me as a second opinion from out of state, which is that troubles me. But you walk into an emergency room, you need to be treated. And a lot of times you come into our health system, we're kind of the hub. People will be transferred into our main hospital and we will do the work. So that thought has never crossed my mind. Maybe it does in other people's situations, but
I deal with that every day. I actually deal with that every day. I just had a patient I was on the phone with at 2:00 in the morning, emergency room. They had that same situation, traveled from Philadelphia, had a great limb saver there, didn't get their insurance squared away as they were moving mom out to California. And suddenly mom ends up with acute swelling in the leg and needs to be treated at the emergency room. They find the Global PAD Association, give me a call. and said, and I was walking her through how to, the questions to ask, everything so that they could get the right treatment, get them out of the emergency room. And we were able to get them on a holiday, actually Monday, to an office-based lab that actually was willing to do the case pro bono. And then we were able to work with them on getting their insurance squared away. But a lot of hospitals, and the patients need to know to ask for this. They need to know to ask for a social worker. Please, summon a social worker, get them down here, because normally they're able to help work with the patient on getting some sort of emergency insurance in place. And so care should not be determined based on insurance. It should be determined based on what is best for that patient to improve their quality of life and get them back on their feet.
Dr. John, you said, I'm sorry, Steve, you said something. When I found out I was diagnosed with diabetes, it was 2000, the year 2000. Once I found out I had diabetes, and that's because I worked in the restaurant industry, owning restaurants or whatever. But once I found out that I had diabetes, I changed immediately everything about my eating habits, the way everything. I changed it. So for someone to come along later and not being willing to work with me to maintain my health and just not look at me as just a file or a record or a number, but actually look at me as a human being that is fighting for my life. And I'm willing to take any advice that is gonna, prolong whatever else would happen to me. Me thinking that I would have any type of an amputation never occurred to me. And once I got that amputation, I was grieving. It's like a death. When you're born with something and someone takes it away from you, it's a cut off, you have a grieving period. I'm still not over mine. But the thing is, no one should just assume because they have peripheral artery disease or diabetes that they're not willing to put the work in order to help save their own lives. It's not us. It's not me that's not willing to save my life. It's the doctors that I was dealing with were not willing to help me to get to the next level in my life. You understand what I'm saying? That's difficult.
I do. And, I absolutely do. I'm careful, about general.
Hey, Steve, I'm gonna have you pause right there. We're coming up on a break, but stay with us and we'll continue our conversation when we get right back.
Sure.
Welcome back, everybody. I don't want to spend any time waxing poetically. So, Steve, tell me about your answer to or your comments to Juanita's questions.
My comments are, I want to be very careful about painting a broad brush with that was Juanita's experience with all doctors. I want to be careful about that. However, there is a lot of information out there about the differences in the racial makeup of the physicians who are dealing with patients, how that can play a role in unconscious bias and the conveyance of information, of necessary information to patients. It goes back to simple advice in terms of asking questions. And then the other thing, at least, and I can speak to my personal experience is, I selected, a doctor who I knew I'd be comfortable with and had a relationship with, and there wasn't any mistrust between me and my physician. But that was something I did ahead of time. It wasn't, I wasn't in a situation where now we're in a crisis and I don't know whether I can trust that person. I had that done ahead of time, and so I had in terms of when I've dealt with my issues, and I would encourage that for everyone listening now, which is, find a family doctor you like. Make sure it's the type of person who you can talk to and be honest with, and who's going to be honest with you, who you'll listen to. All of those things are, super important.
Steve, can we switch gears real quick? How did you, Kim and I were talking about this. I get the sense that pitching a medical documentary is difficult in mainstream media, particularly one that people don't know a lot about. How did you go through the steps to get this on the air? And I imagine there were a lot of road bumps you had to kind of step around or over.
It was, you know, it's tough because, you know, we're talking about a subject, you know, that is hard to show, right? Because that's the other thing. I work in a very visual media, television and streaming and all of that. You got to show things. I think it wasn't as hard as you would think, because I was able to show my people one thing that, and I'll share this, and this is good advice for anyone dealing with diabetes. Media and just in general, public policy makers react to numbers. And when you look at the number of people who are affected by this, we're talking about, I think, what did I say? It was 60 million diabetics we're looking at in America in the next number of years. That's a lot of
pretty
people.
much half of America, yeah.
Right.
Adults.
That's a lot of people. And when you put it in those terms, you know, when you're saying we're talking about 60 million Americans who are going to be dealing with diabetes, that's all you got to say. You know, that's a significant population. We broke it down to like 150,000 toes and limbs. When you phrase it in the numbers, it really becomes easier to sell to someone, because people, like you said, you know, like you both have been saying, that people don't think of diabetes. Oh, diabetes, it's an old person's disease, right? You know, people don't realize the magnitude and the depth of how many people this is affecting. And so that was that made it easier for us to do. And we spent a year working on this. We spent a year.
Wow.
Yes, we spent a year, and we shot in Chicago, we shot in Charlotte, we shot in Atlanta. We had our data journalism team on this. The other thing that I would say that made it easier is when the producer who I worked with, and I should have invited her here on this, when we pitched this story, the other thing that started happening early on is every single person was like, yeah, my uncle, my father, every single person we kept talking to had someone in their family, and not that far, who was either had suffered from diabetes, died of it, or had an amputation. And that was the other
You're
thing.
kidding.
Yes,
Right.
I'll tell you a very powerful story. So when I flew to New York. We also shot in New York. I flew to New York to shoot what we call a page, which is my on-camera part of this. And it was with the senior producer who I was working with, and the producer. And when I got to the room, the crew was all set up. There was a young woman who is a producer for a different show. She works for World News Tonight. And I've worked with her, you know, many, many times. She's very young, and we were kind of meeting in person, even though we've met on Zoom many times. And she was in tears. And the reason why she was emotional is because her father had recently died just 2-3 months earlier from complications from diabetes, and he had multiple.
Wow.
He had, I think, 2 limbs amputated.
Wow.
And the reason why I bring that up is because I encourage anyone who's looking to try to tell this story to just ask the people you're telling it to, do you know anyone in your life who this has happened to? Ask around. You'll find someone who knows someone, and it's just a lot more prevalent than people.
It is.
Yes, than people realize. And
Were they calling it diabetes? So here's my issue is that, and I have this issue with so many of the patients that come our way. Is it
So we
called,
do.
are they
We
just
do
calling
do
it
all the tests.
diabetes, or are they calling it peripheral artery disease, what it is? Because I think they're doing such an injustice to these patients by not calling it what it is. I have so many patients that are just being told you need your leg cut off because of diabetes. And when you say that, patients can't go online and look up possible treatment options to open up their arteries and save their legs. So they do think that amputation is the only option.
Yeah, it is tough because it is the peripheral artery disease that causes, the dying essentially of the limb. And I think that, as you in this half hour, we explain it, right? We talk about the relationship between PAD and diabetes, and that PAD is a complication of diabetes. And you can get PAD without diabetes, right? That can happen. But in most of these cases, what we're talking about is diabetic related amputations. And I do think that, as we talk about diabetes, that PAD just has to be, they're cousins. And we have to just, know that from the get-go. And that because it's just one of the biggest complications: losing your sight, losing your kidney functions, or losing your limbs. And those are the complications we got to be very serious about.
And I would argue too that we need to get in front of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds who have family history, not necessarily risk yet, but because once I'm seeing you with a blocked artery in your leg, the proverbial horse has left the barn. And this is a progressive disease. And I tell patients, you basically have cancer because I'm not curing this and I'm just delaying things. So we know that in people with heart disease, if we get after them at a younger age to help reduce their risk of developing it, making sure they don't become pre-diabetic, getting their cholesterol in control, we can stop this. But I think what you've done, Steve, is now maybe this could be a launching pad for earlier aggressive treatment in people who are at risk, as opposed to those who already have it.
I have heard since this half-hour special has started airing from two different people who I know one in particular who I'm close to, who got his A1C and it came back. I think he said it was a 5.7, 5.6 or 5.7. And to your point, John, it is the first time. And so then my next question, he's like, do I need to be worried? And I said, well, my next question is, does diabetes run in your family? And, so we go down this road. I absolutely think you're right. We need young people to pay attention to these things earlier. To know that if you're, and of course we know that diabetes is that the genetic portion of it is not as clear as it is with, like, for example, breast cancer or something like that. But, for people to start taking seriously, their blood sugar numbers and to get, because I say this to people who ask, and this is just my experience, it is much easier to keep your number from going up than it is to bring it down. Once you're up there and the damage is being done, it's just a lot harder to bring it down. I would like to share something else, and I'm curious, is Juanita still with us?
She is.
Okay. So something else we do in this special that Kim, I noticed, you noticed, is I was very big about wanting every single person who participated to share their A1C on screen. And so we do that. And so you see at the bottom of the screen what my A1C is, what every single person we talked to, I wanted to see their A1C, and I asked them for permission to do that. And the reason why I did that is because I think we need, as John points out, these conversations about blood sugar levels earlier, and that people need to understand what they mean and what their consequences are long before the damage is done, and know what the alarm bells are, what the levels are. And so the other thing I also wanted in this was I wanted the people we talked with who lost limbs to share with me what their A1C was, when they were dealing with this. And it was really, really surprising. The case in Chicago, JB Starks, I think his highest was a 6.9, and he had a 6.9 A1C, which is high, but not crazy high. And the thing about it, we ended up having to cut this for time from the piece. My highest A1C was a 6.9. And it just sort of, it slapped me in the face that this guy had PAD caused by his diabetes from the high blood sugar levels, lost a portion of his foot. If he hadn't switched doctors, would have lost both legs. As he said the doctor who he saw initially was going to take one leg and probably would have taken the second one. And all that happened with a 6.9. Who knows, had he been more, proactive about it earlier, could he have avoided that situation? And that's one of the messages that we get across,
Steve, you was talking about the A1C.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find out what A1C was. I didn't know what that was until after my amputation, and I moved to Michigan, and Dr. Mustafa, they all explained all of these numbers and what they meant to me.
Yeah.
No other doctor ever said your A1C is this. No one.
Even the doctors that are managing your diabetes, or no? Well, is this before you had diabetes?
No, this was while I had diabetes. No one ever told me. I had never heard of A1C until I got to Michigan in 2017. That's when I found out what A1C was. At that time, by the time I found out what it was, the first time I had my A1C numbers, there was 9.7.
Yeah.
9.7. Now my A1C, the last time I got it checked, it was 5.2.
Which is excellent.
Good job.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question though? When you were diagnosed with diabetes, that's how they diagnosed you, is through your A1C.
But they never told me. They came in the room and just told me I had diabetes.
Okay.
And the reason why I found out I had diabetes was because I couldn't understand why I kept going to the bathroom.
Right.
All the time. Right. And I saw a commercial and I said, I'm going to my doctor to see what's going on. My numbers were 600.
Wait. You mean your A1C was this?
No, my diabetic number, 600.
Your glucose levels.
My glucose
levels. Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
600 was that. And at that time, the doctor told me, he said, you could have fell dead in the parking lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're lucky you didn't go into ketoacidosis.
Exactly. But for them, that's the thing. They give you all this information, but they don't explain it to you. And then sometimes they give you none at all.
Was this your family doctor or was it a clinic? What was it?
No, this was my family. Well, it's not my family doctor, but this was my, primary care physician. Yes. Never gave me any kind of information on all of these things that was happening to me. I found out everything that was happening to me and was going on in my body in 2017 when I met Dr. Mustafa at ACV.
Yeah. Prior
to that, I was floating blindly. Knowing I had diabetes, I had to watch what I eat. I had to try and exercise as much as possible.
The doctor who diagnosed you with diabetes, did they put you on medication?
They put me on metformin.
Okay.
And when they put me on metformin, I was down to 96 pounds because I was taking metformin.
Yeah.
That wasn't a good drug for me.
Because, but in terms of the side effects that you felt from
the drug? Of the side effects, yes, because I had side effects from it. But that wasn't what I needed.
Did you ever find out if the metformin worked to reduce your A1C, or were you not having that conversation?
No, I never. That's the thing. That's what I'm saying about when doctors don't communicate with you. Yeah. You're flying blind. You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest with you, Juanita. That is a story that's really unfathomable because,
you haven't heard the worst of it about my story. I have a story for you.
I mean, number one, the notion that they think you're going to get your meds, get you on an oral medication and get your A1C under control without insulin is pretty silly. And I'm not a diabetic specialist, but I remember my internal medicine. But number two, to not even work, I envision myself as a coach and you're the quarterback. I kind of make some recommendations and there's we can use, but I'll let you execute some of the plays. But you gotta, I mean, we gotta have to come to practice together. And that, I'm sorry, that is just a
Look, I was on the
that's
field
a
by
messed up
myself.
story. Geez.
I'm a Saints fan. I was on the field by myself.
Oh,
By
God.
myself.
Yeah.
And along with my family, my daughters, you know, they would come and clean out my refrigerator and put turkey in there, and I got tired of turkey. But
Yeah.
I was on this journey by myself until I found a team of people that really cared about me. Because apparently what I was dealing with prior was people I was a number.
Hmm.
I was just a number. And that's the thing that a lot of us as patients deal with. We're numbers. We're not people, you know, and it's politics and finance that goes along with all of that. And it's disgusting to me.
But if you had cancer, this wouldn't even be, and again, it's maybe apples to oranges, but like people with cancer get treated. I mean, it's just shared decision making. It's just, this is why
Right,
it's so
but then you
important
have
what you've
but
done.
then you have, you know, other media that have come out and have highlighted just a handful of doctors that might be doing too many procedures and blaming amputations on those, an amputation epidemic on those. And then
Mhm.
even more, the latest New York Times article calling out a doctor for allegedly doing too many procedures to try to save a limb. Would you literally crucify a cancer doctor for doing too many procedures to give a patient just one more day to live, to walk, to live, to be able to hug their kids or their grandkids just one more day? No, but yet they do that. And they're crucifying these doctors that are going above and beyond and even putting their life on the line. Doctors
Mhm.
like you, Dr. Phillips, who risk your life with additional exposure to radiation in these long procedures where you're chiseling away slowly through the arteries to try and give that patient just another day to walk,
Mhm.
to live,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
live to walk.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
crazy.
It is. It's horrifying. It's scary. It really is. And that's the other thing about peripheral artery disease that I think I don't, I, you know, I wish I could shout it from the rooftops and people just listen. Just take time to listen to what we're saying. Peripheral artery disease is right up there with cancer,
Yeah.
you know, and a lot of us are dying from it, not knowing what it was, what we were dealing with, because the doctors, some of the doctors didn't have the patience to talk to the patient and educate. I was not educated in this disease that I carry every day. I wasn't. I got educated in 2017 when you know, these doctors that I got in Michigan, they were amazing. They were God sent. So for 7 years, 8 years now, I've been fighting to save my leg. And I come back to Maryland, and the first doctor I see, the first thing they tell me is they ready to amputate. The doctor told me, a specialist told me, I didn't have too much foot left, so I might as well get it cut off. But yet I have doctors in Michigan saying, we're going to look for you, even Kim, we're going to find you the right physicians to take care of you so you won't lose another body part. It's hard to trust the people that you should be trusting. It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's super complicated and, you know, and we share a lot of that. You know, I think it's a complex problem in terms of, you know, and a lot to weigh, and a lot of issues at play in terms of amputation versus vascular surgery, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that I just again though, like, and I'll use an example from our special here. Two of the doctors we talk with, or two of the people we talked with, they're both doctors in Charlotte. One works for Johnson and Johnson now. He's a cardiologist, and his wife is a gastroenterologist.
Dr.
And
Richard Brown.
Richard Brown, yeah, doctor. Oh, so you guys,
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
He was a speaker at our DEI PAD, the Lived African American Experience 4-hour seminar that we had on Saturday. He was
Yeah, it was
amazing.
awesome. It was
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
Dr. Richard Brown is a good example because his father-in-law had diabetes. His father-in-law, as we share, was a boxing coach. And this guy, he's coaches a world champion athlete. And he was diagnosed with diabetes, had PAD. And I think he lost at least 2 limbs. And Dr. Brown and his wife were both doctors at the time when doctors came to them and basically said, we need to cut. And they didn't give them any option. He was getting no medication for PAD. But the point I'm making is that this happened to the father of a doctor who was present when the doctor was telling them this, and they still amputated. See what I'm saying? Some of it is by the time you are faced with that choice, it can be too late. And then secondly, that we now know a lot more than we did 10 years ago. And, efforts like our piece, which is both public service and public affairs and informational, help get the word out, in that, there can be options in your case. You have to explore them, and you may be in a lot of pain, but if you can, at least ask the doctor and start asking the questions. The man who we interviewed in Chicago, JB Starks, he left that emergency room, went to another. And it was because he did that he saved his legs. And so it can be hard to do that, but people need to know that they can.
But some people don't know what, I'm sorry. Some
ahead.
patients don't know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
All they
And
know
that's
is
actually good segue into that's what we do as an organization. With the Global PAD Association. We've been around since 2019, and people call us from emergency rooms. Their family members call us from emergency rooms, and we help guide them to understand what options are available and the critical questions to ask. I mentioned earlier the patient that was in the emergency room at 2 a.m. I was on the phone with her daughter, and she had her earbuds in. I was listening in, and as she was talking to the doctor, I was guiding her with the critical questions she needed to ask to ensure that her mom was getting the most appropriate advanced care in that moment.
Yeah.
And so people can call our Leg Saver hotline, and I can provide that at the end of the show, of course. But we're there for people 24/7, no matter what they need to remove any sort of logistical, emotional, financial barriers through education, high touch advocacy. We'll show up during appointments with you to help you ask those questions. And then we'll help you with those critical lifestyle modifications. We'll help you find that dietitian, the nutritionist, whatever you might need, and we'll do it for free. We are there to help guide the patients every single step of their journey. Right, Juanita?
Yes, every single step. And I appreciate you, Kim. I really do.
Thank you, Kim.
I appreciate this group. I appreciate our group. I appreciate PAD warriors for coming out telling their stories, because it's hard. It's hard to get people to understand what we're going through and then try to help prevent them from going through the same things. It's hard because every time we tell our story, we're back there. We're back in that place. But I'm willing to go back to that place if I can help somebody else to stay out of that space.
That's beautifully said.
And I'm also willing to be the guy that says, don't be like me. Don't do what I did.
Yes.
We love you. Yeah. Steve, I'm curious with that documentary, and I don't remember it. You were mentioning a little bit just the importance of, getting checked early, and you realize there's the ARC Act that is stalled in Congress with Representative Donald Payne that also has PAD.
Yeah.
And I believe he also has diabetes. And I'm not sure if you've talked to him.
We did talk with his office, and he actually was going to be a part of this piece at one point, and we had time issues. One of the things that he's pushing for is for Medicaid and Medicare to cover that ABI test, the essentially the blood pressure test between the hands and feet that can quickly sort of alert you to serious problems with PAD, because currently Medicare or Medicaid do not cover the cost of that test unless you are already presenting symptoms, which
Right.
is, you know, and so his legislation is trying to change that. It has not passed so far.
Yeah, and the quick way we get around that with patients is just to, hey, tell me you have pain when tell me your leg hurts, and that. But you're right, we need to be better at it, because
Yeah, it should be
for other
easier.
things are right.
It should be easier to have that test covered. And you know, I had a debate with one of the people on our side who said that, you know, is that because they were questioning? They're like, that just seems hard to believe. And I'm like, you know, and we went and looked. I mean, it's black and white. You know, Medicare and Medicaid do not cover this test
Yeah.
unless the person already has symptoms. And that's a problem, because it means that that test isn't being administered as often as it could be. And so that was where Dr. Brown and Johnson & Johnson, they're going around the country offering this test for free. But, you know, it's just, it's one other little tool to find PAD instances where, you know, that where the red, it's like a red flag or a red light, or that people need to see. One thing we didn't talk about that I think we also need to talk about are the drugs.
Right.
You know, we need to talk about medication in particular for managing diabetes. And, you know, one of the things we learned in this is that Ozempic, which is this, you know, wonder drug for many people, how in some Black and brown populations, there's a resistance to using it because it reminds people of insulin. And that is a concern, and something that I think has to, you know, that the public health officials are going to have to deal with, because it is a tool that works. I think one study, I can't remember what the percentage was, but when we talk about this in our special, it reduces essentially amputations related to PAD by a significant amount. People who use those class of drugs, and I think that, you know, we, of course, you know, these are new, they're new drugs, but they do appear to work, and they do appear to help a lot of people. I'm not saying that's for everyone, but it's something that I think we need more of a discussion of, in terms of, you know, what are the drugs besides insulin that can help people with diabetes and PAD to prevent these amputations.
You know, Steve, I had to ask to be put on insulin. I had to ask my doctor, insist upon me being put on insulin at the time. I take Trulicity now, which is a once a week you know, injection. But prior to that, I literally had to beg them to give me insulin.
Yeah. The Trulicity is part of that new class of drugs that works.
Yes.
And I, you know, I think that, you know, one of the things I will say, this is a positive thing, I think, you know, I'm not one of those people, as someone who is pre-diabetic, so essentially I'm dealing with it, and my dad died of it. I'm not one of those people who's hating on folks who are using Ozempic to lose weight. I say lose your weight.
Okay.
You know, right? Go lose your weight. You know,
No, that's even great, because being overweight can increase your blood pressure, cholesterol, and put you at risk for peripheral artery disease and heart attack, right?
They're raising the prices of the drugs because they're using them to lose weight when we need them to stay healthy, to save lives, you know.
But one thing they're doing, and this is my opinion. One thing that they're doing is there is a conversation over this that didn't exist before. Now everyone knows now that Ozempic helps people who are diabetic, and of course people, and as a result, people who have PAD. And that wasn't something that people were talking about before 3 years ago. And so for that reason, I like the awareness that all of this Ozempic Hollywood craze has brought to this issue. And just keeping it very real, it's part of the reason why when I was pitching the story that I knew that it was also going to have another little hook to people, which is because Ozempic, this crazy drug everyone's just so fascinated with, is one of the solutions here. It can be one of the solutions. And so as much as there are downsides to the craze over the drug, it has brought this conversation into the public in a way that's never happened before. No one was talking about insulin like this.
That's true.
No, but what I
No,
love so
metformin.
much and makes me just appreciate you even more, I'm loving just hearing how you're thinking about things. And you knew that there was something we needed to bring to the forefront that wasn't being covered. And I love the way you're thinking about it. You're like, you know what? How can we get people to care? And that is a way to get people to care. And that making Ozempic cool by the Hollywood crowd, it makes people care, and it actually helps people in a positive way to help them take more positive steps for their health.
Yes. Almost. So all the people we interviewed of the diabetics, all but one were on Ozempic, and the one who wasn't on Ozempic was doing insulin. And we said that. And the other thing is that, your average American knows what the word Ozempic means now. I would argue that more Americans understand what Ozempic is, and then they do what PAD is.
So how do we make PAD cool? The one chance that I thought we really had to make it to where it was right there in the forefront, in the mainstream, was with Deion Sanders. But Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, his team stopped short of calling it peripheral artery disease. They simply say your issue is hypercoagulation. But I will argue, even though the standard definition or the textbook definition of PAD is with atherosclerosis, I do think that it's a disservice to people to not include hypercoagulability, because a lot of the treatments end up being very, very similar, and they can have similar repercussions, right? Where he was getting his toes amputated because of blocked arteries due to his hypercoagulability. And that one social media piece that came out where his doctor said, you know what, we could try to open those arteries up, but they're just going to close. So why delay the inevitable? Let's just cut it off now. And I started a big social media campaign along with our entire network of thousands of patients to, put the public pressure on the surgeons to do what was right and don't just go and amputate, and to call it what it is, call it peripheral artery disease, and actually go in and try to open the vessels and get him walking. Make sure he's on the right medicine cocktail. Make sure his diet is right and his diabetes potentially would be under control. I guarantee you he does have calcification in his arteries. Everyone does, by the time you're over 50. So why not call it what it is? And they still have not done that to this day. So my challenge for you in part 2 is to get that interview with Deion Sanders and get them to call it what it is. And I think that could have another large impact on the mainstream.
It's a good idea. I would say that, you can, how can I put this? Some of it is about, I often say that, you have a message, right? And then you're trying to get it to a mass group. Is it better to have 100% of the message that you're trying to get through, but the way you're trying to get it only gets 70%? Or is it better to go with 75% that in a way that all 75% of the message is transmitted? And that's one of the problems here with PAD and diabetes in terms of the relationship. Is it's harder to explain to people that this is a complication, often a complication, not always, you know what I mean? All of the things, and get people to understand it and take care of it. For me, and I don't have an answer to this, right? Because I'm thinking off the top of my head here, but my gut is telling me that, at this point, that we have to describe PAD as a complication, an often complication of diabetes. That's going to be the best way to get it said, because everyone has heard of diabetes, they get that. And so if you describe it as an often complication of diabetes, that's about all you can expect the average public to digest. That's my thought off the top of the head. And that, when you're dealing with it on a clinical level, then now, okay, we're talking about peripheral artery disease. Because it just, if you, the people are, it's just harder to, it's harder to explain. And so,
one more question, just that one catalyst, because you could have a million stories. This could have been done 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Why now? What was the actual catalyst where you said now is the time for this story to be done?
That's a very good question. So the producer who I was working with on this story, what actually started it was an article in the state newspaper. And what they did is they took a look at diabetic amputations across the Carolinas and mapped out where the most diabetic amputations were taking place by zip code. And that's what caught our attention. We saw that and we did the same essentially. And what we found is that these diabetic amputations were happening mostly in the South, and mostly in communities that had Black or brown populations that were higher than 25%. And so that's what sort of got us into this.
I think that's what Johnson & Johnson's working on. They have these heat maps that they're developing.
It was the heat map that we saw. When you see the heat map, it sort of, it visualizes this in a way that people can understand and can sort of digest.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you so much. We're so glad you did. We're appreciative of all you're doing to spread awareness. And if anyone wants to catch that ABC live special Severed, of course, you can go to.
You can watch it on abcnews.com on our website. There's a link there. You can watch it on our streaming channel, which you can see if you have like YouTube Live or Roku or Amazon Fire Stick. You can also watch it on Hulu. That's an easy place to get it. It's right right there. It says newly added on Hulu. It's called Severed, S-E-V-E-R-S, Severed. And you can search Hulu for it. Severed Diabetes. And it'll come up, and it's a half-hour special, and we encourage you to watch it, share it. If you use the link, there's a link to it on abcnews.com. I think, Kim, you have it. Please send it around. And frankly, the more people watch this, the more people digest it, the more likely we are going to be able to do a follow-up to it.
And we are going to go ahead.
Yeah, and so that's a good thing in sharing it. Please share it far
And we
more.
will place the link on padstories.com, and we will have it on our website as well, padhelp.org. And if you have any questions after you watch this documentary and you need help, or a loved one needs help and has PAD or diabetes, please don't hesitate to call our Leg Saver hotline at 415-320-7138. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Steve, Dr. John, we really appreciate all your time.